Okay, let's go over sustainability. This is a much shorter chapter, maybe much easier to understand. It's just about being responsible with the Earth's resources, and that's the big summary of this chapter. But we'll go more into details because that's not going to be the definition on the test. To start off, we're going to go over definitions. We don't really have word parts in this section, but we have definitions. To start off, and we'll review this in a second, but I'll just start with this. So natural resources, these are raw materials from nature. Okay, you may have heard that term before. Natural capital and natural income you may not have heard of before, but they're related to natural resources. Okay, so natural capital is the our natural resources with a value to humans. Okay, again, I'm not going to go too deep into it just yet because we'll talk about it in a few minutes. We'll talk it deeper. And then natural income is the growth of natural capital, right? So you can see from the definitions they're connected, right? So that's the first thing to notice. Now, before we go on, we need to define what sustainability is as well. Now, this comes from the IB, right? This is their definition. It's a little bit complicated, but it's also accurate. So, sustainability is the use and management of resources that allows full natural replacement of the resources exploited and full recovery of the ecosystems affected by their extraction and use. So, basically, okay, this is using resources responsibly. If you use a certain amount of trees, right, a sustainable deforestation would allow for that forest to recover. Okay, so if you cut down 10 trees, 10 trees should be able to regrow very quickly. If only 5 can regrow before you cut down again, that's not sustainable, right? You're cutting down the trees too quickly. And that's the long and the short of what sustainability is. It's just, can you replace the resources that are used? Are you allowing the ecosystems to recover? Okay, so I think you understand. So sustainability, right? The ability to sustain their current levels. It's kind of right there in the title. This is another way of thinking about sustainability. Sometimes we think of it only with terms of the environment, but it also involves the economy and ourselves. We want to be as happy and peaceful as possible, right? As justice oriented as possible. We want to have a strong economy so that we can support ourselves, but we also want to protect the environment. So if you're only doing two of them, if you're only protecting the environment and the economy, we call that viable. If you're protecting people and the environment, it's livable. If you're protecting people and the economy, it's equitable. But if you're doing all three, if you're protecting the environment, the economy, and people, that's sustainable. It's a different definition from what the IAB gives you, but it's a different way of thinking about it, and it just shows, you know, what's important to us. Well, we care about the environment, of course. We care about our happiness, of course. We care about the economy, of course. How can we live in a way where all three can be peacefully achieved and sustained, right? And that's kind of our goal, right? We want to do all three. So that again, that's not maybe the definition that the IB uses, but it's a way of thinking about it. Okay. Again, what is sustainability? Let's talk about some facts. So there are not enough resources on Earth for everybody, at least the way that we're living right now. Okay. It takes time to replenish these resources, so it is important to not be wasteful. Okay. So this is an example of sustainability. If you cut down a tree, replant a tree, right? Some places there are laws. If you cut down one tree, you must plant 4 new trees. That's a way of trying to be sustainable, right? That's just an example. We're not going to watch that video, okay? You can watch it in your free time if you want to. And again, we're back to these definitions: natural resources, natural capital, natural income. Natural resources, natural raw materials from nature. Natural capital, natural resources with a value to humans. Natural income, growth of natural capital. Okay, so this is hard to understand just looking at a definition. So I'm going to give you an example. So we're going to use the bank metaphor. Okay, so in a bank, you have a few things, right? So you have capital, right? Capital is your savings. So let's say you have 1,000 RMB in savings in the bank. Okay, your income over here is 100 a month. Let's say, for example, your used resources is 200 a month. Well, doesn't take a lot to know that that's not sustainable. That's unsustainable. Okay, you will eventually run out of your savings. Okay, your capital will go up, will go down, excuse me. Your income is not high enough and your used resources are too high. Okay, so this is an unsustainable situation. Now, in a similar way, we have natural capital, natural income, and used resources here, right? So, natural capital, again, these are these natural resources that have a value to humans. So, in this case, it is this forest. What does this forest have? It has lots of wood and wood products that we can use. Wood biomass. We have 1,000 kilograms of wood biomass that humans want to use and cut down and, make paper and build houses and do all these different things with it. Okay, and burn it for heat. Okay? But we can't just cut down all 1,000 because then there's no more forest. Okay, we have to do it sustainably. So our natural income, so this is the definition, is the growth of natural capital. It's the income. It's what's being added to natural capital. In this case, trees grow back every year 100 kilograms. So our natural capital is 1,000 kilograms. Our natural income is 100 kilograms. Okay? But, unfortunately, we use 200 kilograms of timber every year. And as you can imagine, it's unsustainable, right? We are using too many kilograms of timber. Eventually, we will run out of natural capital and we will destroy the ecosystem. We will no longer have this natural capital. We have run out of these natural resources that we value. Okay? So it's actually, it might seem very hard to understand, but if you simplify it, this is actually pretty easy to understand. And this concept is closely related to sustainability. Again, this is unsustainable, but we have situations where it's sustainable. So let's look at this. So these three concepts are linked together. So when natural income is greater than our used resources, natural capital grows. This is sustainable. So if we have 200 kilograms of tree growth and only use 100 kilograms in timber, then the amount of biomass we have in the forest will grow. That's sustainable. That's good. That's fantastic, right? So that's one situation. When natural income is equal to our used resources, natural capital stays the same. This is also sustainable. So if we delete it, 100 kilograms of tree growth, 100 kilograms of timber used, stays the same, the amount of natural capital stays the same, this is also sustainable. Okay? But of course, like we mentioned, if natural income is less than our used resources, natural capital shrinks, and this is unsustainable. So this situation is unsustainable, and this is what we're trying to avoid. Unfortunately, humans are really bad at this, right? We tend to use resources faster than we can replenish them, and this is not sustainable. This is unsustainable. So that is the problem that we're trying to solve. It requires a change in habits. It requires maybe us talking to our governments and maybe creating laws for corporations. But it's the problem we're trying to solve in environmental science, right? Okay, so I hope that was pretty easy to understand. I think it's a pretty simple concept once you understand that little metaphor. But let's talk about ecological footprint. We're going to just talk about it a little bit here because we're going to talk about it much more when we get to Unit 8.4. Okay, that's the last unit in this class. But it's ecological footprint. So ecological footprint is the area of land and water required to sustainably provide all resources at the rate at which they are being consumed by a given population. If the EF, ecological footprint, is greater than the area available to the population, this is an indication of unsustainability. Okay, so a little hard to understand just from this explanation. I'll give you an example in a second, but hopefully it'll make sense after you see that. But before we get to there, I should mention that it is often given as a quantifiable number, and this represents the natural resource demand. So the ecological footprint is our natural resource demand needed to live a certain way. So us living in a first world country have a higher ecological footprint than a person living in a very poor country, in an LEDC, a low economically developed country. Okay? So this is, we have, well, I'm in America right now. Like everybody owns a car in America. So like my family growing up, it was my dad, my mom, me, and my sister, and we had 4 cars. All 4 of us had a car. That requires a larger, or that is a higher ecological footprint than a person in a poor country where they probably have 0 cars. They probably don't even have a bike, or they might just have a bike, right? So we require more natural resources living in a richer country because we live in a richer way, to be honest. So our ecological footprint is higher. And again, this is given as a quantifiable number. Again, we will learn more about this in Unit 8.4, but I want to go give a tangible example of what this means. So let's go look here. So this, let's choose country. Let's go to China, right? So the ecological footprint in China is 3.5 global hectares per person. So you see your ecological footprint per person. Now, this is, for China, unsustainable because the biocapacity, we've seen this word bio means life. Capacity is like the maximum amount that can be sustained per person, given the maximum amount of life that can be sustained, right, is only 0.8 global hectares per person. So think of this as like the total amount of natural resources available for each person. And this is how much we need in China, right? So this number is higher than this number, so we have a debt in China. So that's the unfortunate truth, is just maybe the average person in China, because of the way they're living and the natural resource situation, it's unsustainable, right? Now, there are other countries, okay. let's look at maybe some other, where's Malaysia, right? So Malaysia, we have here, and again, it changes over time. We see in the past, the biocapacity, the amount of resources available was very high and the ecological footprint was very low. But as the country developed, things changed. And now there's a deficit. Now the biocapacity is very low. Ecological footprint is now at 4.2. There's a deficit. Okay? So the amount of global hectares each person needs is 4.2, which is way more than is available. And we see generally that biocapacity is on a downward trajectory. It goes down over time. And the ecological footprint goes up as the country develops. So there's, at least in this case, there's a crisscross. There's a crossing here. And yeah. And we see that in China, as the country developed, we especially saw that boom in 2000 where all of a sudden ecological footprint grew very rapidly. Now, it can get a little bit more complicated. So in the United States, obviously, high standard of living, ecological footprint is very high. But it's actually reducing a little bit, right? Surprisingly. But the biocapacity is also lowering as well. In Canada, there's actually so many natural resources in Canada that the biocapacity per person is very high. 14.5, compare that to China, which is 0.8, right? Well, the ecological footprint is very high as well, but because the biocapacity is also very high, they're still considered technically sustainable, right? They're still in the plus. So we also have that situation kind of in Brazil. Brazil also has a very high biocapacity per person. It's very interesting, but yeah, if you go to that website, data.footprintnetwork.org, you can check this out, look at other countries, see what's going on. But that's what ecological footprint is. It's a quantifiable number. So in this case, in India, the quantifiable number, it's still a developing country, is just 1 global hectare per person. Okay, if we go to really poor countries, okay, 0.7 per person in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, much smaller than China, which was 3.5. Okay, so because countries a little bit poorer, they don't require as many natural resources. Okay, but it's a number, right? Typically global hectares, GHA. But again, we'll go more into depth in 8.4. So, considering all this, where are we now? So, on August 2nd, we used up our resources for 2023, okay? And that means every day after that, we are using up future generations' resources, okay? This concept is known as ecological overshoot. So, to support all the people on Earth, and if we took everybody's ecological footprint together and joined it all together, it would add up to 1.7 Earths. Well, we only have one Earth. So we are living unsustainably altogether. And we are kind of taking away from our natural capital on Earth. And that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. So again, this concept is called ecological overshoot. We have a special day every year called Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day in which we've used up all our resources. So you see here in 1972, that day was in late December. We needed about 1 Earth in resources to support our population, our demand. And you see over time, this has been slowly changing, and now we've used up 1 Earth's worth of resources by August, right? Hopefully we can reverse this trend, get it going back up, but as it stands now, we are living unsustainably on Earth. We are to use natural capital and natural income. Our natural income is not high enough to sustain the amount of resources we are using, and thus our natural capital is disappearing, and in the future that will have effects on future generations, which is terrible, right? And again, we talked about biocapacity and just what the environment can provide. When we use more than the environment can provide, we call that overshoot. Yeah, and we see here again in 1961 we used 74% of our biocapacity. So maybe the Earth had so many resources to provide for us. We use 74% of it every year. Then by 1985 it was 114%. 2012 is 156%. So it's growing and growing. It's not good. Now, how do we measure this? Okay, so how do we measure whether we're living sustainably or unsustainably? So we do it in two ways, or we do it at a number of scales, right? Typically local to global, but it can be regional as well, but we're going to focus on local and global. So local indicators that are used to quantify sustainability include the air quality index, water quality, urban green space, and waste management usage. So this is a way to see if cities themselves are living sustainably, right? Are they, is the city of Suzhou living in a way that's very sustainable? Okay, it's good for local governments to know, right? And again, we quantify it, we test this using the air quality index, water quality, the amount of green space, and waste management usage. So we'll look at one. So over here on the right, we see this is called the AQI. So this kind of tells us the amount of pollution in the air, which is important, right? The more air pollution in the air, well, first off, the worse our health, but also it's probably going to affect the climate as well, which is not good, right? So yeah. And there are different things that are measured when they measure air quality, right? But this is this is a scale, so 0 to 50 is good, 51 to 100 is moderate, and then we start getting worse and worse. So we're going to just take a quick look at this. Whoops. Okay. So here we have the AQI. So this aqicn.org. If you go to this website, it'll show you air quality in local areas. So this is Beijing. So in Beijing, we see again it's moderate air quality, which is for Beijing very good, because in the past they had bigger issues with air quality. So to be moderate, I think that's a success for Beijing, right? And it shows that creating some laws to change air quality can be effective. But again, this is a small sample. This is just one day, right? But it's still good to see. Now, if we go to a different city, okay, let's check out Zhangjiagang, right? Oh, that was not good. 156. That's unhealthy, right? So this is kind of a red alerts. Maybe not such good air quality today, and it's 156 is PM 2.5. We'll talk about PM 2.5 a lot more when we talk about kind of the atmosphere and atmospheric systems. But yeah, not good. But you can use this website to kind of compare, right? Zoom out and we can see, what areas are really good and what areas are really bad. How's my city compare to other cities, and what can my city do to be better? So like we see here, what's this? Pingshan? I don't know. Control. Come down here. Yichuan, Pingshan, Chenzhou. But we compare it globally, we see, India typically has its problems with air quality. Uh, we see different places like Australia tends to have wonderful air quality, right? Typically in the tens, right? It can compare. Oh, is my, but not everywhere. See, here is 183. Um, oh, doesn't show. Why not? Ooh, that's not good. Wonder why. That's typically not the case. Typically Los Angeles is relatively okay, but it seems like we're having a bad air quality day. But we see, the U.S. Ooh, wow. See, this place in Baja California today, 500. Sometimes uh, it can go off the chart. I remember in the past there was days where China would go off the chart. That kind of made news, but it happens from time to time. Uh, could be caused by like a fire or something like that, right? But generally speaking, the U.S. has good air quality. Again, you can um, compare your country and your city to other cities around the world. So AQI, very useful for that. Okay, it's a local indicator of air pollution. You can also check out, water quality and urban green space to see how your city's doing compared to other cities. Global indicators, that's kind of what we use to see how the Earth is doing in general. Um, they include those in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as the SDGs. Okay, so let's talk about these. So these are two very important kind of landmark global assessments that were done in the past about the environment, about sustainability, and they kind of gave us a sense of how the Earth is doing on a global level. So the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, otherwise known as MA, gave a scientific appraisal of the condition and trends in the world's ecosystems and the services they provide using environmental indicators, as well as the scientific basis for action to conserve and use them sustainably. All right, so kind of just studied the trends in the environment on a global level. So we see this picture on the right. We see if in 1970 the population index was 100, we can see, freshwater species dropped down to about 50 by 2000. So we saw a drastic reduction in freshwater fish and species in that time period. So them being able to do this assessment helped us understand the environment a lot better. Okay. Additionally, the UN Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015, and they are goals to achieve by 2030. So they are still ongoing. Okay. So these are some of the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of them are about the environment and about sustainability, but there's also good health, quality education, gender equality as goals. These are kind of goals for healthy living and not just the environment, but we do have things affordable and clean energy, climate action, life below water, life on land that are about the environment as well. And if we go to this website, dashboards.sdgindex.org/rankings, we can see how countries are doing, right? So each country gets kind of a score on how they're doing. So we see at the top, Finland is doing very well. Okay, and if we search, okay, let's give China a search. Right, they are 63rd. They probably are doing very well in some SDGs, and very poorly in others. So we see on the left side, we have poverty. They're doing very well with poverty. But we come down, let's go to some of the environment ones. Clean water and sanitation, maybe not so good, but that green arrow means it's getting better, right? So it shows the direction it's going, so that's a good thing. Okay. Sustainable cities and communities, not so great, but kind of slowly improving. And then maybe one thing that could be improved a lot, we see down here, life on land, not so good and getting worse, right? So it gives a snapshot of or like a picture of what each country is doing, how they're doing, whether they're headed in the right direction. And that website allows us to see. That website lets us compare countries between each other, right? We get to see which country is doing the best, what can be improved in each of these sustainable development goals. So yeah, it's these are global indicators as to what countries use to make nationwide policy and to try to improve themselves, right? So it's very important. So let's get back to the MA, right? So the general findings of this assessment, one is that humans are using natural resources unsustainably. So the bottom line of the MA findings is that human actions are depleting Earth's natural capital. And that's a quote from their website, from the findings, right? That's the conclusion. So we learned that word natural capital. That's our natural resources, right? That's the natural resources that we value. Well, we are depleting them, and that's the bottom line. That's the conclusion. Another general finding is that 60% of the world's ecosystems have been degraded. They're getting worse in quality, right? That's not good either. Additionally, this has resulted in a decrease in biodiversity on Earth. Also not good. Not good for ecosystem resilience as well, if we remember us talking about biodiversity in relation to resilience. Okay. And then the degradation of ecosystem services could grow significantly worse during the first half of this century and is a barrier to achieving the sustainable development goals. Okay, so problem could get worse as countries develop more and we get richer and we don't change our habits enough and we don't pressure our governments enough and we don't pressure businesses enough. This happens. It might get worse. So again, if you want to learn more about the MA, you can look at this website. It gives more detailed findings, but these were kind of the basics, right? Summary. Environmental impact assessments. So this is what governments and organizations do to try to help the environment and create sustainable development, like building development. When we have a building project and we want to develop, maybe build a new house or build a new office building, for example, or housing development, we're looking for the analysis of an environmental impact assessment. So an EIA is a report prepared before a development project or large change in the way an area of land is used. So the purpose of it is to understand the environmental, social, and economic impacts that may occur from a new building project. To also help develop ways to minimize the damage done to the environment. So what is the process? Well, this is the process, right? So if we start off, so let's say, for example, we want to build a giant mall in the city, right? And to do so, we have to reclaim some green space, maybe some natural land, like a piece of natural land. Will we be harming the environment too much to justify the economic gains or not? We have to do an analysis to figure that out. So we start off by conducting a baseline study. So that means like a study at the beginning. What is the environment like now? Okay, that is to help us compare it to what it will be in the future once the building project is done, once the mall is done. How will the area look like compared to what it was at the beginning? Then we predict positive and negative impacts. Okay, will it affect biodiversity? Will it affect kind of runoff? Will it pollute the waterways? What impacts will it have? Then we're going to think of ways to reduce the negative impacts. So maybe we want to build the mall. We see some negative impacts. What are some solutions to minimize these negative impacts so that we can do this in an environmentally sustainable way? Then we're going to consider the economic benefits and the environmental impacts. So which is bigger than the other? Maybe we conclude that the environmental impacts are too big to justify the economic benefits, so we abandon the mall project. Or we think, oh, the economic benefits justify the environmental impacts, so we go ahead, we approve it. And that's what would be the next step. A government agency approves or rejects the project after considering the benefits and impacts. And then after it's been approved, there will generally be continued monitoring of the project. So they'll audit and continue watching it and seeing what happened, right? So the question is, why do environmental impact assessments? So first is it supports the goals of environmental protection and sustainable development. It integrates environmental protection and economic decisions at the earliest stages of planning. So that's kind of important, and we'll talk about this soon, right? It's better to prevent a problem than to fix a problem, right? When it comes to the environment, it's always much easier to prevent a problem than to try to fix it. So this is our attempt to prevent environmental disaster before it happens. So we do this before we build so that we can predict what will happen. And if we predict something terrible will happen, we abandon it, right? That's the goal, right? And then to predict environmental, social, economic, and cultural consequences and provide involvement of the public and government agencies. So if it is a large project, for example, like let's say a new highway in an area, or maybe a new subway in an area, typically the government will want to do an environmental impact assessment. They will want the public to share their feelings. Does the public agree with it or disagree with it? Do they think the impact on the environment is too big, or whether it is justified based on the environmental impact assessment? And the government agency also gets to get their input as well, right? So this is why we do it. Some of the weaknesses of these EIAs, different countries have different standards. So some countries are very strict, some countries are very loose, right? You can kind of guess which countries are a little bit loose, which countries are a little bit stricter, right? There's a lack of standard training for practitioners. So different government agencies and different environmental engineers, things like this, they will have or building project managers. They'll have different standards for practitioners. And then also, what is the boundary of the impact zone? So it's not as simple as we're going to build a mall here, so we only have to measure the impact here. Typically, it's going to have an impact beyond that, right? So would have an impact on the amount of sunlight that reaches a neighboring area. Will the runoff, if you have waste discharge from this area, will it kind of spread to a different area of the city? And where is that line drawn, right? And then again, a lack of consideration of indirect impacts. So sometimes it's easy to predict direct impacts, but harder to predict some indirect environmental impacts. So maybe if biodiversity is weakened in an area, what are some chain of events that might happen as a result of that? And maybe it's not really considered, right? Also, it's expensive, right? That's maybe one of the bigger complaints. So, and I think that is it for this section. But yeah, that's it. So we'll continue on next with humans and pollution. But yeah, see you soon.